Walter Dawson froze at his front door, weathered hand gripping the frame so tight his knuckles turned white. The German shepherd pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest as two uniformed officers and a man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, court papers extended. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about the last piece of his son he had left. "Mr. Dawson, we have a court order to seize the German shepherd," the suit announced, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Harrington is quite eager to have his property returned." The dog's growl deepened as Walter's heart hammered against his ribs, the same heart this dog had saved twice now. Behind him, hanging on the wall, his son's purple heart caught the morning light. "This dog isn't just property," Walter said, voice steady despite the trembling in his legs. "He saved my life in more ways than one. And I know exactly what that man did to him." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The town of Clearwater, Arizona wasn't much to look at. A dusty collection of sun-bleached buildings, family-owned shops, and modest homes where most folks knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where traditions mattered and change came slow as molasses in January. Walter Dawson had lived here his entire life, except for those 2 years in Vietnam that still visited him in nightmares nearly 5 decades later. At 67, Walter was a portrait of quiet dignity, weathered by time. Tall and lean, with stooped shoulders, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who'd learned the hard way that rushing led to mistakes. His face, tanned and creased from years under the Arizona sun, rarely betrayed emotion, save for the occasional twitch of his bristly white mustache or the warmth that sometimes flickered in his pale blue eyes. Those eyes had seen too much: war, death, the slow decline of his beloved Martha to cancer 5 years ago, and the flag-draped coffin of his only son Michael, returned from Iraq 15 years earlier. Walter's daily routine rarely varied. Up at 5:30 every morning, military habits die hard. Coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise, tending his modest vegetable garden while the day was still cool, then retreating indoors as the merciless sun climbed higher. His small brick house at the end of Sycamore Street had seen better days, much like its owner. The mortgage was paid off, but property taxes and medical bills were a constant worry, chipping away at his modest military pension and Social Security. Martha would have had this place looking better, he often muttered to himself, running a hand along peeling paint or eyeing the sagging gutter. His wife had been the heart of their home, filling it with warmth and life. Without her, the house felt like just walls and a roof, shelter, not home. The television provided background noise more than entertainment, except for the evening news, which Walter watched religiously. Lately, it had been full of Maxwell Harrington, the wealthy real estate developer running for Senate. Harrington was everything Walter wasn't: polished, ambitious, connected. His campaign ads touted his brief military service and commitment to veterans, but something about his perfect smile made Walter's stomach turn. The only regular visitor to Walter's quiet existence was Bill Jenkins from 2 streets over, another Vietnam vet who stopped by Tuesdays for coffee and conversation. They rarely discussed the war directly. Just knowing someone else understood was enough. Walter's doctor had been after him to get more involved since his second heart attack last year. Dr. Peterson talked about senior centers and volunteer work like they were miracle cures. Walter nodded politely during these lectures while silently dismissing them. What was the point? Martha was gone. Michael was gone. All that remained were memories and the hollow echo of promises kept. Until the day Walter Dawson walked into the Clearwater Animal Shelter with leftover meatloaf, and everything changed. Walter hadn't planned on visiting the animal shelter that Wednesday afternoon. It was Martha who had always insisted on bringing their leftover food to the strays rather than throwing it away. "Waste not, want not," she'd say with that practical smile of hers. 5 years after her passing, Walter still found himself wrapping up the remains of his meatloaf dinner in aluminum foil, driving the 3 miles to the edge of town where the Clearwater Animal Shelter operated out of a converted ranch house. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and wet dog, a combination that wrinkled Walter's nose as he pushed open the glass door, bell jingling overhead. The reception area was empty except for a young woman hunched over a computer, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, circles under her eyes suggesting too many late nights and too much care. "Excuse me," Walter said, holding up his foil-wrapped package. "Got some leftover meatloaf." "Martha, my wife, she always brought the extras over." The woman looked up, her tired expression warming. "Oh, Mr. Dawson, I remember you. I'm Sarah Miller. We met at the Memorial Day service last year. I coordinate adoptions here now." She stood, extending her hand. "The animals always appreciated Mrs. Dawson's contributions. You're very kind to continue." Walter shook her hand, embarrassed he didn't remember her. Names and faces slipped away from him these days, like water through cupped hands. "Just seemed right," he mumbled. "Dogs gotta eat too." Sarah took the package with a genuine smile. "Would you like to see who your meatloaf is going to feed today? We've got some new arrivals that could use a friendly face." Before Walter could decline, she was already leading him through a door into the kennel area. The barking intensified, small yaps, deep woofs, desperate whines. Each cage contained a story of abandonment or neglect, reflected in hopeful or distrustful eyes that followed their progress down the concrete corridor. "Most of these will find homes," Sarah explained, her voice rising above the canine chorus. "But some—" She trailed off, stopping before a kennel at the far end, separated from the others. Walter peered through the chain link. In the back corner, a German shepherd lay with his head on his paws, watching them with suspicious amber eyes. The dog's left ear was partially missing, and a ragged scar ran across his muzzle. Unlike the other dogs, he made no sound, no movement, just that steady, evaluating stare. "This is Ranger," Sarah said softly. "Found him 3 weeks ago out by the highway, half-starved. Somebody dumped him there. No collar, but he's microchipped. We contacted the registered owner, some estate manager for a wealthy family, but they said they didn't want him back. Claimed he was too aggressive." Walter studied the dog with professional detachment. "Doesn't look aggressive to me. Looks military." Sarah glanced at him, surprised. "Military?" "Way he's holding himself. Assessing. My unit in Nam had dogs like that. Trained." The German shepherd's ears had perked up at Walter's voice. Now, slowly, the dog rose and approached the front of the kennel, movements fluid despite visible ribs and another scar across his flank. "He hasn't come to the front for anyone," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. "He's scheduled for—" She stopped herself. "Scheduled for what?" Walter asked, though he already knew. "Euthanasia. Tomorrow morning. We've tried working with him, but he won't respond to training commands, won't let the vet examine him properly. We can't adopt out a dog with unknown behavioral issues, especially one this size." Walter frowned. Something about the dog's eyes, intelligent, assessing but not mean. "Mind if I try something?" At Sarah's nod, Walter straightened his posture and cleared his throat. In a firm, clear voice, he said, "Attention!" The effect was immediate. The German shepherd's body transformed from wary slouch to perfect military posture, sitting ramrod straight, eyes forward. Sarah gasped softly beside him. "Well, I'll be damned," Walter muttered. He tried another command. "Hold." The dog remained perfectly still, only his eyes tracking Walter's movements. "He's been trained all right," Walter said. "Military or police for sure. Someone put a lot of work into him." He looked at Sarah. "Can I go in?" She hesitated. "Are you sure? We don't know his triggers. I've handled military dogs before, long time ago, but some things you don't forget. Sarah unlocked the kennel with nervous fingers. Be careful, please. I'll get the catch pole just in case. Walter entered slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. The German Shepherd watched him without blinking, still holding his commanded position. At ease, boy, Walter said softly. The dog relaxed marginally, but remained alert, tail still. Walter crouched, ignoring the protest from his arthritic knees, and extended a closed fist for the dog to sniff. Let's see what you're all about, Ranger. The German Shepherd leaned forward cautiously, nostrils flaring as he took in Walter's scent. Then, to Sarah's visible astonishment, he moved closer and sat directly in front of Walter, just out of touching range, eyes fixed on Walter's face. Well, look at that, Walter said, a rare smile tugging at his mustache. You understand respect, don't you, boy? Something passed between man and dog in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had seen too much. Mr. Dawson, Sarah said from the kennel door. I've never seen him respond like this to anyone. Walter nodded, still looking at the dog. Military dogs bond strong. Someone trained him well, then betrayed that trust. Takes another serviceman to understand that kind of hurt. Would you? Sarah hesitated, then plunged ahead. Would you consider fostering him, just for a week or two, until we can find a rescue group that specializes in working dogs? It would save his life. Walter's immediate instinct was to refuse. He lived alone for a reason. No complications, no responsibilities, no one to leave behind when his heart finally gave out for good. And yet, I'm not set up for a dog, he said. Got no food, no leash, nothing. We can provide all that, Sarah replied quickly. Food, leash, crate, everything you need. And I'd check in regularly to see how it's going. Please, Mr. Dawson, just 2 weeks. The German Shepherd hadn't moved, was still watching Walter with those intelligent eyes that seemed to contain unspoken stories. Against his better judgment, Walter nodded once. 2 weeks. That's all. The relief on Sarah's face was palpable. Thank you. You're saving his life, truly. An hour later, Walter's pickup truck bumped down the dirt road toward home, a German Shepherd sitting perfectly upright in the passenger seat. Beside the dog was a cardboard box containing dog food, bowls, a worn leash, and medication for the healing wounds on Ranger's flank. Ground rules, Walter said aloud, glancing at his new companion. No barking at all hours. No digging in the garden, no begging at the table. He paused. And this is temporary, understand? 2 weeks. Then you're going to someone who knows what to do with a dog like you. Ranger turned his head slightly, those amber eyes seeming to look straight through Walter's gruff exterior. The first night was rough. Walter made a bed for Ranger in the laundry room with old blankets, but the dog refused to lie down. He stood at attention beside the makeshift bed until Walter finally went to sleep around 11. Sometime after midnight, Walter woke to a strange sound, a whimpering, thrashing noise. He found Ranger in the throes of what could only be described as a nightmare, legs running in place, soft cries escaping his throat. "Hey, hey!" Walter said, crouching awkwardly beside the dog. "Stand down, soldier. You're safe now." Ranger startled awake, eyes wild for a moment before focusing on Walter. To the old man's surprise, the dog sighed deeply and leaned his head against Walter's knee. "Yeah, I get those too," Walter muttered, patting the coarse fur awkwardly. "War has a way of following you home." By the end of the first week, they had established a routine. Morning walks before the heat set in. Breakfast, where Ranger sat patiently while Walter ate, never begging but accepting his own food with dignified appreciation. Afternoons in the relative cool of the house, Walter reading his worn Louis L'Amour novels while Ranger lay nearby, always positioned to see both Walter and the front door. Bill Jenkins stopped by for their regular Tuesday coffee and let out a low whistle when Ranger performed a perfect heel at Walter's command. "That's no ordinary shelter mutt," Bill observed, sipping his coffee on the porch. "That dog's had serious training, military for sure." "Shelter says he was abandoned," Walter replied, watching as Ranger lay at his feet, alert even in rest. "Can't figure why anyone would dump a dog with this kind of training." Bill shook his head. "Something doesn't add up. Mind if I make some calls? Got a buddy works with the K-9 units at Fort Huachuca, might know something about military dogs in the area." Walter nodded. "Wouldn't mind knowing what I'm dealing with." That night, Walter suffered one of his heart episodes. Not a full attack, but the familiar tightening in his chest, the cold sweat, the sense of impending doom. He fumbled for his medication in the bathroom cabinet, vision blurring. The bottle slipped from his fingers, pills scattering across the tile floor. Walter cursed, gripping the sink as his knees threatened to buckle. Then suddenly, Ranger was there, nudging Walter's hand with his muzzle, then darting to the bedroom where the emergency phone sat on the nightstand. The dog barked once, sharply, the first time Walter had heard him bark inside the house. The bark cleared Walter's head enough to follow, staggering to the bedroom where he managed to call Dr. Peterson's after-hours line. Ranger stayed pressed against Walter's leg as he talked to the nurse, then swallowed the backup medication she reminded him to take. When the episode passed, Walter sat on the edge of his bed, hand resting on Ranger's head. "How'd you know, boy?" he asked softly. "How'd you know what was happening?" The second week brought a revelation. As Walter's limited finances dwindled with the addition of dog food to his grocery list, he knew he couldn't keep Ranger permanently. A trip to the vet for the dog's healing wounds had cost nearly a week's worth of food budget. With resignation, he called Sarah to discuss returning Ranger to the shelter. "I think we found a rescue group that specializes in retired military dogs," Sarah told him. "They could take him next week. Would it be possible for you to keep him until then?" Walter agreed, ignoring the twinge of something like disappointment in his chest. It was for the best. The dog deserved someone who could afford proper care, who might not drop dead of a heart attack and leave him abandoned all over again. That evening, Walter watched the local news as he ate his dinner, Ranger lying nearby. The broadcast turned to campaign coverage, showing footage of Maxwell Harrington at a veterans event, shaking hands and smiling his perfect smile. "As a veteran myself, I understand the sacrifices our military heroes have made," Harrington was saying, voice smooth as polished marble. "When I'm elected to the Senate—" A low growl interrupted the speech. Walter looked over to see Ranger on his feet, hackles raised, staring at the television with a mixture of fear and aggression Walter hadn't seen before. "What's got into you, boy?" Walter asked, reaching for the remote to raise the volume. But as Maxwell Harrington's face filled the screen again, Ranger backed away, body trembling, teeth bared. It wasn't aggression, Walter realized with sudden clarity. It was fear. Pure, traumatic fear. Walter turned off the television, moving slowly to Ranger's side. The dog was panting now, pupils dilated. "What is it?" Walter asked softly, kneeling beside the trembling animal. "What's that man done to you?" Ranger pressed against Walter's leg, seeking reassurance in a way he never had before. Walter's eyes narrowed as he looked back at the dark television screen, a cold suspicion forming in his mind. "Well, ain't that interesting?" he murmured, scratching behind Ranger's good ear. "Seems we might have more to figure out than I thought." The next morning, Walter sat in his truck outside the Clearwater Animal Shelter for 15 minutes before working up the nerve to go in. Ranger waited patiently in the passenger seat, seemingly unaware that decisions about his future were being made. The dog's reaction to Maxwell Harrington had kept Walter awake half the night, turning possibilities over in his mind like worry stones. When he finally entered the shelter, Sarah greeted him with her usual warm smile. Mr. Dawson, I wasn't expecting you today. Is everything okay with Ranger? Need to see his paperwork, Walter said without preamble. The intake forms, whatever you've got on his background. Sarah's smile faltered. Did something happen? Maybe. Need to check something first. She led him to a small office cluttered with filing cabinets and dog training manuals. A framed photo of Sarah surrounded by puppies hung crookedly on one wall. She pulled a thin folder from a cabinet and handed it to Walter. This is everything we have. It's not much, she admitted. As I mentioned, he was found abandoned on Highway 18. The microchip traced back to Harrington Estate Holdings, LLC. I spoke with their property manager, a Mr. Collins, who said Ranger had been a family pet but was too aggressive around their children. Walter's eyes narrowed as he scanned the sparse documentation. Says here the chip was registered in 2009. That would make Ranger at least 12 years old. Sarah nodded. The vet estimated between 11 and 13 based on his teeth and joints. That's senior age for a German Shepherd. Military working dogs typically serve 8 to 10 years, Walter muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. If he was trained in 2009, I'm sorry. What was that about military dogs? Walter closed the folder. Need to make a phone call. Can I use your office for a minute? Private matter. Looking confused but cooperative, Sarah nodded. Of course, take your time. I'll be at the front desk if you need anything. When she left, Walter pulled out his cell phone, a basic flip model that Bill Jenkins was always teasing him about, and called his friend. Bill, Walter here. Made any progress on that inquiry about the dog? Bill's voice crackled through the small speaker. Funny you should call. Just heard back from my contact at Fort Huachuca. Says there were several military working dogs deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan around 2010 to 2012 with similar descriptions. Most are accounted for, adopted by handlers working with police departments or deceased. But there was one interesting case. Dog named Ranger German Shepherd, deployed with a Marine unit in Fallujah in 2010, listed as transferred to civilian ownership in 2012. Walter's heart began to pound. Did your contact have information on what unit? 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Why? That means something to you? The blood drained from Walter's face. He gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. Michael was 3-5. Deployed to Fallujah 2010, killed in action 2012. A long silence filled the line before Bill spoke again, his voice softer. Jesus, Walt, you think this is the same dog? Need to find out for certain. Can your contact send any identifying information? Tags, tattoos, anything like that? Already did. Military working dogs get a tattoo inside their ear, usually a letter followed by numbers. This one would be R629 if it's the same dog. Walter thanked his friend and hung up, his mind racing. He sat still for a long moment, staring at the sparse office wall before calling out to Sarah. She appeared in the doorway almost immediately. Everything okay, Mr. Dawson? Need to check something on Ranger. Won't hurt him, just need to look at his ear. Curiosity evident in her expression, Sarah led Walter back to his truck where Ranger waited. Walter opened the passenger door and spoke softly to the dog. Need to see your ear, boy. Hold still now. With gentle fingers, Walter lifted Ranger's intact right ear and carefully folded it back to examine the inner surface. There, slightly faded but still legible, was a small tattoo, R629. Walter released the ear and stepped back, steadying himself against the truck as the implications washed over him. This wasn't just any military dog. This was a dog that had served alongside his son, a dog that Michael might have known, might have worked with, might have mentioned in those brief, censored letters home. Mr. Dawson? Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. Did you find what you were looking for? Walter nodded slowly. He's a military dog, all right. Served in Iraq. He turned to face her, his expression grave. "Same unit as my son." Sarah's eyes widened. "Your son who died there?" "Yes." Walter's voice was steady despite the emotion roiling beneath the surface. "Need to make one more call. Then I think we need to have a serious conversation about who's been looking after this dog." Back in Sarah's office, Walter called Bill again and asked him to dig deeper into the connection between Ranger and Maxwell Harrington. While waiting for his friend to call back, Walter explained to Sarah what he had discovered so far. "So Ranger served in Iraq with your son's unit, then somehow ended up with Maxwell Harrington," Sarah summarized, her forehead creased with concern. "And now Harrington's people claim they never wanted him in the first place?" "Something doesn't add up," Walter agreed. "And Ranger had a strong reaction to seeing Harrington on TV last night. Terrified, not aggressive. A dog doesn't react that way unless there's history there." Sarah bit her lip, hesitating before speaking. "Mr. Dawson, I should tell you. Mr. Collins called again yesterday. He was quite insistent about reclaiming Ranger. Said there had been a misunderstanding that Mr. Harrington very much wants the dog back." Walter's expression hardened. "When?" "He wanted to pick him up this weekend. I explained that Ranger was in foster care and showing significant improvement, but he was persistent." "Did you tell him who was fostering the dog?" Sarah shook her head. "No, we never disclose foster information without permission. But I'm worried. Mr. Collins implied they would take legal action if necessary. Said something about valuable property." Walter's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. It was Bill, his voice tense with excitement. "Walter, you're not going to believe this. My contact pulled some strings, got access to deployment records from 2010 to 2012. Guess who was a lieutenant with 3-5 Marines in Fallujah at the same time as your son?" Walter's grip tightened on the phone. "Maxwell Harrington." "Bingo! But here's where it gets interesting. Harrington received a Purple Heart and honorable discharge in 2012 after an engagement that resulted in several casualties, including Michael," Walter finished, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "Right. Harrington's been using his heroic service as a cornerstone of his Senate campaign. But my contact says there were always rumors about what really happened that day. Nothing official, nothing on record, but whispers that things didn't go down exactly as reported." Walter thanked his friend and hung up, his mind racing. He turned to Sarah, who was watching him with concern. "I need to keep Ranger," he said firmly. "But you said your finances. This isn't about money anymore. This dog served with my son. Maybe even was there when he died. And Maxwell Harrington was there too, as his commanding officer." Walter's voice grew determined. "I'm not giving Ranger back to that man. Not until I know exactly what happened over there." Sarah studied Walter's face, then nodded slowly. "I'll help however I can. But Mr. Dawson, if they pursue this legally, Ranger is technically still their property." "Then we'd better find proof of what really happened," Walter said grimly. "Because I've got a feeling Ranger is the key to a truth someone doesn't want told." Over the next 2 days, Walter and Bill dug deeper into Harrington's military service and the circumstances surrounding Michael's death. Walter spent hours at the local library using their computers to research news articles about the incident, a skill his grandson had taught him before the boy moved away to college. The official story was straightforward. Lieutenant Harrington led a patrol that was ambushed. Despite being wounded himself, he organized a defensive position that saved many lives, though several Marines, including Sergeant Michael Dawson, were killed in action. But the more Walter learned about military working dogs like Ranger, the more questions emerged. These dogs were highly valued, typically serving with handlers who developed close bonds with them. They weren't simply transferred to civilian ownership without good reason, especially to someone like Harrington who had no specialized training. Walter scheduled an appointment with Dr. James Morris, the only veterinarian in Clearwater. Dr. Morris was a brusque, efficient man in his 50s who had treated the town's animals for over 20 years. "Wanted to get him checked out proper," Walter explained as Dr. Morris examined Ranger. "Previous vet just looked at the obvious wounds, but I'm concerned about his overall health." Dr. Morris nodded as he carefully examined Ranger's scarred flank. "These aren't new injuries. Some of these scars are years old, and there's evidence of multiple healed fractures in his right hind leg." He looked up at Walter, his expression grim. "This dog has been through significant physical trauma, and not all of it appears to be combat-related." "What do you mean? See these marks here?" Dr. Morris pointed to a pattern of small, circular scars partially hidden by fur. "These are consistent with cigarette burns, and these linear marks across his back? Those come from a narrow object like a riding crop or cane, deliberately inflicted over time." Walter felt a cold rage building inside him. "You're saying he was abused?" "Systematically," Dr. Morris confirmed, "and given the pattern and healing over several years." He straightened up and made notes in Ranger's chart. "There's something else you should know. The microchip we detected is standard, but there's another smaller chip near his shoulder blade, military grade from what I can tell, not something civilian vets typically implant." "Can you tell what it's for?" Dr. Morris shook his head. "Beyond my expertise. But I know someone who might help, a colleague who worked with military dogs at Walter Reed. I can give her a call if you'd like." Walter nodded gratefully. "Anything you can find out would help." That evening, Walter sat on his porch, watching the sunset with Ranger at his feet. The German Shepherd had settled into life at the Dawson home with remarkable ease, as if somehow recognizing it as a safe haven after years of suffering. "What happened over there, boy?" Walter murmured, rubbing Ranger's good ear. "What did you see? And what does Harrington not want you telling?" As if understanding the question, Ranger lifted his head and met Walter's gaze with those intelligent amber eyes. Walter's cell phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Dr. Morris. "Mr. Dawson, I spoke with my colleague. That secondary chip is definitely military. Specifically, it's from a program that equipped some working dogs with recording devices. The military experimented with having dogs wear small cameras in certain operations. The chip contains GPS data and possibly connects to whatever recording device the dog was wearing." "Where is this recording device now?" "That's the thing. According to my colleague, it would have been integrated into a special tactical vest. But she doubts the vest would still be with the dog after all these years." Walter thanked the veterinarian and hung up, his mind racing. If Ranger had been wearing a recording device during that final mission, if there was footage of what really happened when Michael died. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car coming up his driveway, an expensive black SUV with tinted windows. Walter tensed as the vehicle stopped and a well-dressed man in his 40s stepped out, adjusting his tie as he approached the porch. "Mr. Dawson?" the man called. "Douglas Collins, property manager for the Harrington estate. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Beside Walter, Ranger went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Walter stood slowly, his hand resting protectively on Ranger's head. "Dog's not for sale or return," he said flatly. Collins smiled thinly. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Ranger is legally Mr. Harrington's property. He's a specially trained security dog, very valuable. Mr. Harrington is prepared to be generous, $5,000 for his immediate return." "Not interested?" Collins' smile faded. Mr. Dawson, I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. The dog belongs to Mr. Harrington. We have the registration papers and microchip information to prove it. What I understand, Walter said carefully, is that this dog served with my son in Iraq. Same unit, same deployment, and your boss was their commanding officer. A flicker of surprise crossed Collins's face before his professional mask returned. I'm not here to discuss Mr. and Harrington's military service, which I'm sure you know was exemplary. I'm here to retrieve valuable property. Property that shows signs of systematic abuse? Walter countered. Dr. Morris documented everything. Cigarette burns, beatings, broken bones. Want to explain that? Collins' expression hardened. Dogs in protection work sometimes sustain injuries during training. Nothing unusual about that? These weren't training injuries. These were torture. Walter stood straighter, the rage he'd been containing now evident in his voice. And I think I know why. Ranger was there when Michael died, wasn't he? He saw what really happened. And that recording device in his tactical vest captured it all. Collins' momentary stillness confirmed Walter's suspicion. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no recording device. Not anymore, Walter agreed, because Harrington made sure of that. But he couldn't remove the military chip in Ranger's shoulder, could he? The one that proves this dog was part of a special recording program. Collins's demeanor shifted from professional to threatening. Mr. Dawson, you're an elderly man with documented heart problems. You live alone. Accidents happen to people in your situation all the time. He glanced meaningfully at Ranger. And dangerous dogs get put down when they attack people. Think carefully about the position you're putting yourself in. Ranger growled again, louder this time, sensing the threat. Walter didn't flinch. I've faced worse threats from better men than you. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing and attempted intimidation. Collins stared at Walter for a long moment before turning back toward his SUV. This isn't over, Mr. Dawson. Not by a long shot. Mr. Harrington protects what's his. As the black SUV disappeared down the driveway, Walter let out a long breath and sat down heavily on the porch steps, his heart racing uncomfortably in his chest. Ranger pressed against his side as if offering support. Well, boy, Walter said quietly, I think we just declared war on a man who's about to be a U.S. senator. And I don't even know exactly what we're fighting for yet. That night, Walter called Sarah and told her about Collins's visit. She was horrified by the veiled threats and insisted on coming over immediately. When she arrived, Walter explained everything they had discovered about Ranger's military background and the connection to Michael's unit. This is bigger than just a dog ownership dispute, Sarah said, pacing Walter's small living room. If Mr. Harrington is hiding something about what happened in Iraq, something that could damage his Senate campaign, then Ranger isn't just a dog to him, Walter finished. He's evidence. We need legal help, Sarah decided. I know someone, Tom Richards. He's young but brilliant, specializes in animal rights cases, took on the Clearwater factory farm last year pro bono and won. Walter nodded slowly. Make the call. But Sarah, this could get complicated. Dangerous, even. You don't have to get involved. Sarah looked down at Ranger, who had positioned himself protectively between them and the door. I'm already involved, Mr. Dawson, and I don't abandon those who need help, human or animal. As Sarah made the call to Tom Richards, Walter found himself thinking about Michael's last letter home, received just days before the notification officers arrived at his door. His son had mentioned working with the four-legged Marines and how they were the real heroes saving our butts every day. Had he been referring to Ranger? Had this very dog been at Michael's side in those final days? For the first time in years, Walter felt a purpose taking hold, a reason to fight that went beyond merely existing day to day. If Ranger had been there with Michael at the end, If the dog knew what really happened, then Walter owed it to his son's memory to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. And if Maxwell Harrington had something to hide, something worth threatening an old man over, then Walter was damn well going to find out what it was. Tom Richards looked exactly like what Walter expected from a lawyer fresh out of law school. Tailored suit that hung slightly too loose on his lanky frame, eager eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the earnest demeanor of someone who still believed the law was primarily about justice rather than who could afford to buy it. They met at Walter's kitchen table the following morning, Sarah sitting beside Walter while Ranger maintained his now customary position near the door. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," Tom said, reviewing his notes. "You've been fostering a German Shepherd named Ranger who was surrendered to the local shelter. You've discovered he's a former military working dog who served in the same unit as your late son. The dog's registered owner is Maxwell Harrington, currently running for Senate, who was also your son's commanding officer during the deployment where your son was killed. And now Harrington wants the dog back to the point of sending his property manager to make veiled threats against you." Walter nodded. "That's the short version." Tom removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Dawson, I won't sugarcoat this. Legally speaking, your position is precarious. Pets are considered property under Arizona law. If Mr. Harrington can prove ownership, which it sounds like he can with the microchip registration, a court would likely order Ranger returned to him." "Even with evidence of abuse?" Sarah asked. "That complicates things but doesn't necessarily change the ownership claim. We could file animal cruelty charges, but those are notoriously difficult to prove, especially when the alleged abuse occurred over time with no direct witnesses." Tom replaced his glasses. "That said, I think there's more to this story than a simple ownership dispute." "The military connection," Walter stated. "Exactly. Mr. Harrington's Senate campaign heavily features his military service, particularly the incident where your son was killed. If there's evidence that contradicts the official account of that incident—" Walter leaned forward. "Like footage from a recording device on a military working dog?" Tom's eyes widened. "Is there such footage?" "Don't know," Walter admitted. "But Ranger has a military chip that connects to recording equipment, and Harrington seems mighty concerned about getting him back." Tom scribbled furious notes. "This changes our approach entirely. We need to focus on 2 tracks, legally protecting your temporary custody of Ranger while we investigate the military angle." He looked up. "Do you have any contacts who could help access military records about the incident?" "Bill Jenkins has been making calls. He's got connections at Fort Huachuca." "Good. Keep pursuing that. Meanwhile, I'll file for an emergency injunction to prevent anyone from seizing Ranger while we investigate. I'll argue that there's a matter of public interest at stake that supersedes the normal property considerations." Sarah pulled a folder from her bag. "I've brought all the shelter's documentation, plus Dr. Morris's report on Ranger's injuries. Will that help?" "Immensely." Tom accepted the folder. "Also, I think we should get Ranger examined by a specialist in military working dogs, someone who can testify to his training and potentially help us understand what triggers his reaction to Harrington." Walter nodded, then hesitated. "There's the matter of your fee. I'm not a wealthy man." Tom raised a hand. "No fee, Mr. Dawson. My father served in Desert Storm, came home with PTSD that the VA ignored for years. If Harrington is building a political career on a false military narrative, that's personal for me." After Tom left with promises to file the injunction immediately, Sarah helped Walter organize the documents they'd collected so far. "I should get back to the shelter," she said eventually, "but I don't like the idea of you staying here alone after those threats. Would you consider staying with a friend for a few days?" Walter shook his head. "This is my home. Been defending it and myself for nearly 7 decades. Not about to run now." Sarah looked as though she wanted to argue, but instead jotted down her phone number. Call me if anything happens, day or night. And I mean anything, Mr. Dawson. A suspicious car driving by, a noise outside, anything. Walter, he corrected her. Think we're past the formalities at this point. She smiled. Walter, then, promise me you'll be careful. After Sarah left, Walter spent the afternoon going through a box of Michael's belongings that had been returned after his death. Most were personal items: dog-eared paperbacks, a worn baseball cap, photos of friends in uniform. Walter had examined everything countless times over the years, looking for something, anything that might help him understand why his only child had been taken from him. This time he was looking specifically for mentions of ranger or military working dogs. He found a small notebook filled with Michael's cramped handwriting, daily observations, inside jokes, notes about his fellow Marines. Walter had read it before, but now he focused on entries from the final weeks before Michael's death. R saved our asses again today, one entry read. IED spotting like a champ. Handler says he's the best nose in the Corps. Another, dated just 3 days before the ambush. LUT IH pushing patrols deeper into hot zones. Says higher-ups want more actionable intel. Feels wrong. R agrees. Wouldn't go forward until Handler T physically pulled him. Smart dog. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he read the final entry, dated the day before Michael died. Something off with Lotte. H. Keeps changing patrol routes last minute, insisting on smaller teams. T says R is acting strange around him. Won't take commands directly from Lutti. 2 more weeks and we're homebound. Just need to keep our heads down. Walter closed the notebook, his mind racing. The entries weren't conclusive, but they suggested tension between Lieutenant Harrington and the rest of the unit, including Ranger and his handler. And Michael had sensed something wrong just before the ambush that took his life. The ringing of his cell phone interrupted Walter's thoughts. It was Bill. Walt, got some interesting information from my contact. The official report on the ambush that killed Michael says Lieutenant Harrington was leading a 12-man patrol when they were attacked by insurgents. Harrington was wounded but organized a defensive position that allowed most of the unit to escape. 4 Marines died, including Michael. That matches what's been reported, Walter said. Right, but here's where it gets interesting. My contact says there were inconsistencies in the debriefing. Some of the survivors initially gave conflicting accounts about Harrington's actions during the ambush. These inconsistencies were noted but ultimately dismissed as combat confusion. What kind of inconsistencies? Bill hesitated. The details are redacted in the files my contact could access. But he did find one more thing. Ranger's handler, a Marine named Tyler Peterson, requested a formal investigation into the incident. Request was denied and Peterson was reassigned shortly after. Is Peterson still in the Corps? No, he was medically discharged in 2013. My contact is trying to locate him now. Walter thanked his friend and hung up, feeling a growing certainty that Ranger was indeed the key to understanding what really happened the day Michael died. If Ranger's handler had requested an investigation, if there were inconsistencies in the survivor accounts. His thoughts were interrupted by Ranger's sudden alertness. The German shepherd rose from his resting place, ears forward, body tense. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he moved to the front window. Walter joined him, peering through the curtains. A black SUV similar to Collins's was parked across the street, a man visible behind the wheel. As Walter watched, the man raised something to his face. Binoculars or a camera, Walter couldn't tell which. Surveillance, Walter muttered. Harrington's not wasting any time. The presence of the SUV made Walter uneasy, but it also confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just about a dog. Harrington was worried enough to have Walter watched. As darkness fell, Walter kept the lights in his house minimal, moving between rooms carefully to avoid silhouetting himself in windows. His years in Vietnam had taught him the value of such precautions, skills he never expected to use in his own home decades later. Around midnight, Ranger's head snapped up from where he'd been dozing near Walter's bed. The dog moved silently to the bedroom door, his posture alert, but not alarmed. Walter reached for the baseball bat he'd placed beside his bed. He owned firearms but had locked them away years ago after briefly considering using one on himself during the dark months following Michael's death. Soft footsteps creaked on the porch. Then a quiet tapping at the front door. "Walter?" Sarah's voice, barely audible. "It's me." Something's happened. Relief flooded through Walter as he made his way to the door, Ranger at his heels. He opened it to find Sarah looking pale and disheveled, her eyes wide with worry. "Someone broke into the shelter," she said as Walter ushered her inside. "Went straight for the records room. All the files are gone, including Ranger's." Walter secured the door behind her. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "I wasn't there. The alarm system alerted me." She sank onto Walter's couch, hands trembling slightly. "The police are investigating, but this isn't a coincidence, is it?" "No," Walter agreed grimly. "Harrington's covering his tracks." Sarah looked at Ranger, who had positioned himself between them and the door. "What does he think is in those records?" "We already know Ranger was his dog." "Maybe he's worried about what Dr. Morris documented, the evidence of abuse." Walter sat heavily in his armchair. "Or maybe he's just removing anything that connects him to Ranger, erasing the paper trail." "I'm scared, Walter," Sarah admitted. "These people are serious. Tom called earlier. The judge granted our emergency injunction, but if they're willing to break into the shelter—" Walter understood her fear. He felt it too, a cold weight in his stomach. But he'd faced fear before, in jungles and rice paddies halfway around the world. Fear was an old companion. "You should stay here tonight," he decided. "Spare room's not much, but it's safe. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps." Sarah nodded gratefully. As Walter showed her to the spare room, his cell phone rang. It was after midnight. No one called at this hour with good news. The number was unfamiliar. Walter answered cautiously. "Hello? Is this Walter Dawson?" A man's voice, unfamiliar, tense. "Who's asking?" "My name is Tyler Peterson. I was Ranger's handler in Iraq." The man paused. "And I served with your son Michael." Walter's hand tightened on the phone. "Bill Jenkins reached you." "Yes. He said you have Ranger now and that Harrington is trying to get him back." Peterson's voice hardened. "Whatever you do, don't let that happen. Ranger is the only proof of what really went down that day." "What did happen?" Walter asked, his heart pounding. "How did my son die?" "Not over the phone," Peterson replied. "These people have resources. I can be in Clearwater by tomorrow afternoon. We'll talk then." After arranging to meet Peterson the following day, Walter tried to sleep but found himself staring at the ceiling, mind racing. After so many years of uncertainty, he might finally learn the truth about Michael's death. The prospect was both terrifying and desperately needed. The morning brought a flurry of activity. Tom Richards called to confirm the injunction was in place. No one could legally remove Ranger from Walter's custody until a hearing scheduled for the following week. Sarah contacted Dr. Morris about retrieving copies of his examination records, since the shelter's copies had been stolen. Bill came by to discuss security precautions, having noticed the surveillance SUV still parked down the street. "Classic intimidation tactic," Bill said, peering through Walter's kitchen blinds at the vehicle. "Want me to have a chat with our friend out there?" Walter shook his head. "Let him watch. Means Harrington's worried, and that tells us we're on the right track." By early afternoon they had prepared for Peterson's arrival. Bill would pick him up from the bus station to ensure he wasn't followed. Sarah had taken the day off work to help coordinate their growing operation from Walter's kitchen table, which was now covered with notes, timelines, and copies of news articles about Harrington's military service. Walter was surprised by the energy he felt. For years, he'd been going through the motions of living, a ghost in his own life. Now, purpose had returned. Michael deserved the truth. Ranger deserved protection. And if Maxwell Harrington had built a career on lies that cost American lives, he deserved to be exposed. At precisely 3 o'clock, Bill's pickup truck pulled into Walter's driveway. A moment later, Bill entered with a stocky, hard-faced man in his mid-30s. The newcomer had a military bearing. Despite his civilian clothes, his watchful eyes immediately scanning the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. Those eyes fixed on Ranger, who had risen at the stranger's entrance. For a moment, man and dog stared at each other, neither moving. Then Ranger's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. The dog moved forward, pressing his head against the man's hand. "Hey, buddy," Peterson said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Been a long time." Walter watched the reunion with a lump in his throat. Here was living proof of the bond between handler and military dog, unbroken despite years of separation. Peterson looked up at Walter, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for taking care of him. I tried to find him after I got discharged, but Harrington made sure that was impossible." They gathered around Walter's kitchen table, Peterson sitting with Ranger pressed against his leg, unwilling to break physical contact after their long separation. "I need to know what happened to my son," Walter said simply. "The real story, not the official one." Peterson nodded, his expression grim. "The official story is that we were on a routine patrol when we were ambushed by insurgents. Lieutenant Harrington was wounded, but heroically organized a defensive position that saved most of the unit." His jaw tightened. "That's a lie. We weren't ambushed. We were sold out." The kitchen fell silent as Peterson collected his thoughts. Harrington had been acting strange for weeks, changing patrol routes last minute, insisting on smaller teams, meeting with local contacts alone. Ranger didn't trust him. Military dogs sense things we don't. That last patrol, Harrington insisted we split into 2 smaller teams to cover more ground. He led one team, including Michael. I was with the other team, with Ranger. Peterson stared down at his hands. "We heard the gunfire from about half a click away. By the time we reached them, it was chaos. 4 men down, including Michael. Harrington was nowhere to be seen. We assumed he'd been captured or killed until we found him hiding in a drainage culvert, uninjured." Walter's breath caught. "He abandoned his men?" "Worse," Peterson said darkly. "Later, we found communication equipment on him that wasn't standard issue, the kind insurgents used. Some of us started to suspect he'd been feeding information to the enemy, maybe even coordinating the attack." "Why would he do that?" Sarah asked, horrified. "Money, probably, or some misguided attempt to create an incident that would make him look heroic." Peterson shook his head. Whatever the reason, Ranger knew. "When we found Harrington, Ranger went crazy, trying to get at him, behavior I'd never seen before from a trained military dog." "The recording equipment," Walter prompted. "Bill said some military dogs were outfitted with cameras." Peterson nodded. "Ranger was part of a pilot program. He wore a tactical vest with an integrated camera system during operations. That day he wasn't with Harrington's team, but when we responded to the attack, his camera was recording. It would have captured everything, including finding Harrington hiding, uninjured, while his men were dying." "Where is this footage now?" Tom asked. "After we returned to base, the equipment mysteriously disappeared from the secured storage area. When I raised concerns about Harrington's actions, I was shut down hard. 3 weeks later, I was reassigned, and Ranger was suddenly listed as transferred to civilian ownership. I tried fighting it, but then my knee got blown out in another operation, and I was shipped stateside for medical discharge." Peterson's face darkened. By the time I could start looking for Ranger again, all records of his transfer had been classified. Walter processed this information slowly, each word landing like a physical blow. If Peterson was right, Maxwell Harrington had not only abandoned his men, possibly even betrayed them, but had then built a political career on their deaths. "The footage is gone," Walter said eventually. "So it's your word against his?" "Not exactly," Peterson replied, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small flash drive. "I made a copy of Ranger's footage from the 3 days leading up to the attack. Not the attack itself, but enough to show Harrington's suspicious behavior, meetings with locals he shouldn't have been meeting with, Ranger's reaction to him." He placed the drive on the table. "It's not smoking gun-proof, but it raises serious questions about his actions." "Why haven't you come forward before now?" Bill asked. Peterson's expression hardened. "I tried right after it happened. Was told to stand down, that an investigation would damage morale. After my discharge, I contacted a reporter. 2 days later, my apartment was broken into, my computer stolen. A week after that, I was pulled over for erratic driving and police found drugs in my car, drugs I never had. Charges were eventually dropped, but the message was clear." He nodded toward the flash drive. "I've kept that copy hidden, waiting for the right moment. When Harrington announced his Senate run, I knew I had to do something, but I needed more than just the preliminary footage." "You needed Ranger," Walter concluded. "The only other witness to what happened." "Exactly. A military working dog's reaction to someone can be admitted as evidence. Ranger's behavior around Harrington would speak volumes to anyone who understands these dogs." Sarah had been quiet, taking notes, but now she looked up. "So, what's our next step? We have the preliminary footage, we have Ranger, and we have your testimony. Is that enough to expose Harrington?" Tom considered carefully. "It's enough to raise serious questions, especially with the upcoming election. But Harrington has resources and connections. He'll fight back hard." "Let him," Walter said, a cold determination settling over him. "My son died because of this man's actions. Ranger suffered years of abuse." "How many other lives has Harrington destroyed climbing his way to power?" He looked around the table at their unlikely alliance. A young lawyer, an animal shelter worker, a retired veteran, an ex-military dog handler, and a German shepherd with scars both visible and hidden. "We need to make this public. All of it." As they discussed strategy late into the evening, none of them noticed the black SUV that had been watching Walter's house was now gone, replaced by an unmarked van parked further down the street, its windows tinted, its occupants hidden from view. Dawn broke over Clearwater with a crimson intensity that reminded Walter of that old sailor's warning, "Red sky in morning, sailors take warning." He'd been up since 4:30, unable to sleep with the weight of yesterday's revelations pressing on his mind. Tyler Peterson had taken the spare room after Sarah insisted on returning to her apartment to check on her cats. Bill had gone home but promised to return early, bringing breakfast and his legally registered handgun. "Just in case," he'd said, his expression grim. Walter sat on his porch with a cup of black coffee, Ranger a solid presence beside him. The German shepherd hadn't left Walter's side since Peterson's arrival, as if understanding that everything was coming to a head. Walter placed a weathered hand on the dog's head, feeling the slight tremble in his own fingers. Age, emotion, or both, he couldn't tell. "We're going to set things right," he told Ranger softly. "For Michael. For you. For all of them." Tom Richards arrived first, looking remarkably put together for 7 a.m., his briefcase bulging with documents. "I've been up all night preparing," he explained, accepting the coffee Walter offered. "We need to move quickly. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning, but I'm concerned about what Harrington might do in the meantime." "Such as?" Walter asked, though he had a pretty good idea. Intimidation, for one. The break-in at the shelter is just the beginning. Harassment, threats, maybe worse. Tom's young face looked suddenly older, more serious. These people play hardball, Mr. Dawson. Harrington's not just fighting for a dog, he's fighting for his entire political future. Walter nodded, unsurprised. Been in one war already? Guess I'm about to be in another. Bill arrived next, carrying a bag of still-warm bagels and a holstered .38 beneath his jacket. Peterson emerged from the spare room, his face showing the strain of too little sleep and too many demons. The kitchen became their war room, maps and timelines spread across the table as they formulated their strategy. "I've reached out to a journalist I trust," Tom said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel. "Maggie Chen from the Arizona Republic. She's known for investigative pieces on political corruption. If we give her Peterson's testimony and the preliminary footage, she could break the story." "Can she be trusted?" Peterson asked, the wariness in his voice a testament to past betrayals. "She broke the story on the governor's corruption scandal last year," Tom replied. "Cost her some threats but won her a Pulitzer nomination. She doesn't scare easily." Peterson nodded, somewhat reassured. "What about Ranger's testimony?" "A dog can't exactly take the stand." "Actually," Sarah interjected, having arrived with a box of pastries and determination written across her face, "there's precedent for using working dogs' reactions as evidence. I've been researching all night. In several cases involving former military or police dogs, courts have admitted handler testimony about a dog's behavior towards specific individuals." "We'd need an expert witness," Tom mused, "someone who can explain to the court and the public what Ranger's reaction to Harrington means." "I know just the person," Peterson said. "My commanding officer from K-9 training, Major Eliza Washington. She's retired now but still consults on military working dog programs. If anyone can testify to the significance of Ranger's behavior, it's her." Walter listened to the discussion with a growing sense of hope. For years, he'd carried the weight of uncertainty about Michael's death, the official story never quite matching the son he knew. Now, finally, the truth seemed within reach. His cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Sarah's number, which was confusing since she was sitting right across from him. Sarah looked equally puzzled as Walter answered. "Mr. Dawson?" A male voice, unfamiliar and urgent. "This is Officer Ramirez with Clearwater PD. We found this number in Miss Miller's contacts. There's been a break-in at her apartment. Her neighbor called it in. The place is pretty torn up, but no sign of Ms. Miller. We're trying to locate her now." Walter's blood ran cold as he stared at Sarah, very much present and unharmed in his kitchen. "Officer, Sarah Miller is sitting right here with me. Has been for the past hour." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, are you certain? Because someone was definitely in her apartment last night. Place is ransacked." Someone was looking for her, Walter realized aloud. He handed the phone to a confused Sarah, who quickly confirmed her identity to the officer and arranged to meet police at her apartment later. "They're escalating," Tom said when Sarah hung up. "First the shelter records, now your apartment. They're looking for the evidence, and for you." Walter made a decision. "We need to move up our timeline, today, not Monday. If they're already breaking into homes, it's only going to get worse." Tom nodded grimly. "I'll call Maggie Chen, see if she can meet us this morning." He stepped outside to make the call, returning moments later with a satisfied expression. "She'll meet us at her office at 10 a.m. Says to bring everything we've got." As they gathered their evidence and prepared to leave, Walter noticed Ranger's sudden alertness. The German Shepherd moved to the window, body rigid, a low growl building in his throat. Bill joined him, peering carefully through the blinds. "Unmarked van, across the street." "Wasn't there earlier?" Walter felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Everyone out the back door, now." They moved with quiet efficiency, gathering only the essential evidence. Peterson helped Walter secure Ranger's leash while Sarah and Tom packed the documents into a single bag. Bill positioned himself at the rear door, hand resting on his concealed weapon as he scanned the backyard. "Clear," he murmured. "My truck's just around the side. We go together, quick and quiet." They slipped out the back door in single file, Walter bringing up the rear after locking his home of 40 years, perhaps for the last time, a thought that brought a surprising lack of sentiment. The house was just a structure. Justice for Michael, protection for Ranger. Those were what mattered now. They made it to Bill's truck without incident, crowding into the extended cab. As they pulled away, Walter glanced back to see two men in dark clothing approaching his front door. One carried something that looked suspiciously like a battering ram. "They're not even pretending to follow the law anymore," Tom observed, his face pale but determined. "This confirms we're on the right track." The Arizona Republic's offices occupied 3 floors of a glass-fronted building in downtown Phoenix. Maggie Chen met them in the lobby, a compact woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes behind stylish glasses and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd built a career on asking uncomfortable questions. "Conference room's secure," she said, after brief introductions, eyeing Ranger with raised eyebrows. "Is the dog part of this?" "The dog is this," Walter replied simply. Chen led them to a conference room with blinds drawn against the morning sun. As they settled around the table, she placed a digital recorder in the center. "Mind if I record? Helps me get the details right." After receiving nods of agreement, she turned to Walter. "Let's start from the beginning. Why would a Senate candidate be sending men to break into your home over a German Shepherd?" For the next hour, they laid out the entire story. Michael's death in Iraq, Ranger's discovery at the shelter, the connection to Harrington, Peterson's testimony about what really happened during the ambush, and the evidence of systematic abuse Ranger had suffered at Harrington's hands. Chen listened without interruption, taking occasional notes but mostly absorbing the narrative with the focus of a predator scenting blood. When they finished, she sat back, considering. "This is explosive," she said finally. "Career ending for Harrington if substantiated. But he'll fight back with everything he's got. His campaign has millions in funding, powerful backers, a team of lawyers." She looked directly at Walter. "Are you prepared for what comes next? Because once I publish, there's no going back. They'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, possibly worse." Walter met her gaze steadily. "My son died because of this man's actions. Then Harrington built a career on his death. There is no going back for me." Chen nodded, satisfied. "I'll need to verify what I can independently, corroborate Peterson's military service, confirm Ranger's identity as a military working dog, substantiate the timeline." She glanced at her watch. "Give me until tomorrow morning. I want this story solid before we go to print." "We may not have until tomorrow," Tom interjected, explaining about the break-ins and the men at Walter's house. "Harrington knows we're gathering evidence. He's trying to shut us down before we can go public." Chen frowned. "That complicates things. You all need somewhere safe to stay tonight." "I have a cabin," Bill offered. "Up in the Tonto Forest. Off-grid, hard to find unless you know where to look. We can lay low there until the story breaks." Chen agreed to meet them at the cabin the following morning with a draft of the article. As they prepared to leave, she pulled Walter aside. "Mr. Dawson, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Once this story publishes, your life will never be the same. Harrington has powerful friends, people who can make problems disappear or create them." Walter looked over at Ranger, who sat alertly beside Peterson, his scarred face somehow noble in its resilience. "Mrs. Chen, I'm 78 years old. Lost my wife, lost my son. Don't have much else to lose. But that dog there, he survived hell to bring the truth home. Least I can do is make sure someone hears it." The drive to Bill's cabin took them through winding mountain roads, the landscape transitioning from desert scrub to pine forest as they climbed in elevation. Walter sat in the back seat with Ranger, the German shepherd's head resting on his knee as if offering comfort. "Used to bring Michael up here fishing," Walter remarked as they passed a gleaming mountain lake. "Boy could never sit still long enough to catch anything worthwhile, but he loved it all the same." Peterson smiled from the front seat. He mentioned those trips. Said his dad taught him patience by being the least patient fisherman in Arizona. Walter chuckled, a sound rusty from disuse. "That sounds like Michael, always calling me out." The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend. A sturdy structure of weathered logs with a wide porch and metal roof. Isolated by acres of forest, it offered both protection and the painful beauty of nature that Walter had avoided since Martha's death. "Solar panels provide basic electricity," Bill explained as he unlocked the door. "Propane for cooking and heat. No cell service, but I've got a satellite phone for emergencies." The interior was simple but comfortable. A main room with stone fireplace, small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. They settled in quickly, establishing a perimeter check routine and arranging watches. Despite the circumstances, there was something almost peaceful about being removed from civilization, surrounded by pine-scented air and the gentle sounds of the forest. As evening approached, Walter found himself on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ranger lay at his feet, ever vigilant but more relaxed in these natural surroundings. "Mind if I join you?" Peterson asked, emerging from the cabin with 2 mugs of coffee. Walter accepted one gratefully. Free country. They sat in companionable silence for a while, 2 men connected by war, loss, and a remarkable dog. Finally, Peterson spoke, his voice low. "I never got to tell your son's parents how sorry I was about what happened." "You're telling one of them now?" Walter replied simply. Peterson nodded, clutching his mug tighter. "Michael was one of the good ones, solid Marine, better human being. Always had photos of you and your wife, talked about fishing trips and how you taught him to change a tire when he was 12. He paused. "The day before the ambush, we were talking about going home. He said he was going to take you to the Grand Canyon because you'd lived in Arizona your whole life but never seen it." Walter felt his throat tighten. "Never knew that." "He said you'd spent your whole life making sure he got to see everything, and it was his turn to return the favor." Peterson looked out at the darkening forest. "When everything went sideways the next day, when we couldn't find Harrington, Michael was the one who kept everyone focused, protecting the wounded, establishing a perimeter. Even with his injuries, he was leading." "How did he die?" Walter asked, the question he'd never received a satisfactory answer to. Peterson took a deep breath. "We were pinned down. Michael had been hit in the initial attack but was still fighting. When we arrived with reinforcements, he was providing covering fire for 2 wounded Marines. That's when—" Peterson's voice faltered. "That's when Harrington finally appeared, coming back from where he'd been hiding. He gave an order to fall back, but Michael refused to leave the wounded." There was an argument. Next thing we knew, more insurgents flanked our position from exactly the direction Harrington had come from. Michael took multiple hits protecting the others. Walter absorbed this information silently, pain and pride battling in his chest. It sounded like Michael, stubborn, principled, unwilling to abandon those who needed him. "Harrington received a Purple Heart," Walter said eventually. "For what?" Peterson's expression darkened. "Claimed he was wounded during the initial attack. Had a bullet graze on his arm that nobody remembered seeing during the fight." By the time questions started being raised, the narrative was already set. "Hero officer leads valiant defense, suffers wounds, saves most of his men." He shook his head in disgust. "4 good Marines died that day, including your son. Harrington got a medal and a stepping stone to politics. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom calling from inside the cabin. "You guys better come see this." They hurried inside to find the others gathered around a small television that Bill had hooked up to the solar power system. On screen was Maxwell Harrington himself, standing at a podium with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Deeply concerned by these baseless allegations, Harrington was saying, his expression a perfect mixture of regret and resolve. "I served proudly alongside heroes like Sergeant Michael Dawson, whose sacrifice I honor every day. These attempts to smear my service record are not only an attack on me, but on the memory of those brave Marines." Walter felt his blood pressure spike. "Son of a bitch is getting out ahead of the story." "Someone leaked," Sarah said, looking stricken. "But who? We were all together." "Doesn't matter now," Bill replied grimly. "Cat's out of the bag." On screen, Harrington continued with practiced sincerity. "I understand that grief can lead people to search for complicated explanations. Mr. Dawson lost his son, a loss I deeply sympathize with as Michael's commanding officer. But exploiting that tragedy for political purposes dishonors his son's sacrifice." Walter's hands clenched into fists at his sides, using Michael's name. After what he did, Harrington shifted to a more somber tone. "As for the claims regarding a military working dog in my care, I have always been a strong supporter of our K9 program. The dog in question was legally transferred to me after its service, and I provided it with the best care until health issues forced me to surrender it to a shelter when my overseas commitments meant I could no longer provide adequate attention." "Liar," Peterson muttered. "Those health issues were wounds from his abuse." "I have instructed my legal team to seek a restraining order against Mr. Dawson and his associates," Harrington continued, "as their harassment and unfounded accusations have created serious concerns for my family's safety. I will continue my campaign with the same integrity and dedication I brought to my military service." The press conference ended with Harrington declining to take questions, citing the ongoing legal situation. Tom switched off the television, his expression grim. He's trying to paint Walter as a grief-deranged old man and himself as the sympathetic victim. Classic deflection strategy. "But how did he know what we were planning?" Sarah asked. "We've been careful." "Someone at the paper, maybe," Bill suggested, "or someone at the police station after Sarah's break-in was reported." "Doesn't matter now," Walter said firmly. "What matters is our response." Chen had promised to call Bill's satellite phone that evening to confirm details for the next day. When the phone finally rang around 9, they gathered expectantly, but Bill's expression grew increasingly concerned as he listened. "What is it?" Walter asked when Bill finally hung up. "Chen says her editor is suddenly getting cold feet about the story. Wants more corroboration, more sources. Says they can't go to print with just Peterson's testimony and preliminary footage that doesn't show the actual ambush." Bill's face was grim. "She thinks someone got to the paper's ownership." "They're a subsidiary of a larger media group that has political connections." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Their primary strategy, exposing Harrington through the media, was crumbling before their eyes. "So what now?" Sarah asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "If we can't go through the press, we go direct to the people," Peterson said suddenly. "Tomorrow is Harrington's campaign rally at the Phoenix Convention Center. Thousands of attendees plus media coverage. We show up with Ranger, confront Harrington directly. Once the dog reacts to him on camera, people will ask questions." "That's incredibly risky," Tom cautioned. "Harrington will have security, possibly police presence. They could arrest you for causing a disturbance." "What choice do we have?" Peterson countered. "Harrington's already controlling the narrative. By tomorrow, he'll have Walter painted as a delusional old man with a vendetta. We need to show people the truth before it's too late." All eyes turned to Walter, who sat quietly considering the situation. His gaze drifted to the mantel where Bill had placed a framed photo. Walter, Martha, and a teenage Michael on a fishing trip, all smiles and sunburned noses. "Michael never backed down from what was right," Walter said finally, "even when it cost him everything." He looked at Ranger, the living link to his son's final moments. "We go to the rally. We face Harrington directly. Let people see how Ranger reacts to him, and let them draw their own conclusions." As they planned late into the night, Walter felt a strange calm settle over him. Tomorrow would bring either justice or defeat. But either way, he would face Harrington with the truth, and with the loyal dog who had carried that truth home from the battlefield where Michael had fallen. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains, obscuring the stars. A storm was coming, in more ways than one. The Phoenix Convention Center loomed before them like a fortress, its glass facade reflecting the harsh midday sun. Walter sat in the passenger seat of Bill's truck, watching the streams of people filing inside for Harrington's campaign rally. Campaign volunteers in matching T-shirts distributed signs and literature, while security personnel with earpieces surveyed the crowd from strategic positions. "Security's tight," Bill observed, his hands tense on the steering wheel. "Metal detectors at every entrance. Bag checks." Walter nodded, his mouth dry. The weight of what they were about to do pressed on him like a physical force. In the back seat, Tom and Sarah sat in tense silence, while Peterson kept a reassuring hand on Ranger's head. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Tom asked, his young face showing the strain of the past 24 hours. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his usually neat hair was disheveled from running nervous fingers through it. They all nodded. The plan was simple by necessity. Enter separately to avoid drawing attention, meet at the designated spot inside, then wait for the right moment to confront Harrington with Ranger. Tom had warned them repeatedly about the legal risks: trespassing, disturbing the peace, potentially even assault charges if things went sideways. But they had run out of options and time. "Remember," Peterson said, "the goal is to get Ranger close enough to Harrington for people to see the dog's reaction. We're not there to create a scene. Ranger will do that for us if Harrington is as guilty as we believe." Walter looked out at the convention center again, remembering another time he had faced seemingly insurmountable odds. Vietnam, 1968. His unit pinned down in the jungle, outnumbered and outgunned. They had survived through determination and watching each other's backs. Today would require the same. "Let's move," he said simply. They exited the truck in staggered intervals. Sarah went first, her press pass from the Animal Shelter magazine she occasionally contributed to hanging around her neck. Tom followed 5 minutes later, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the young professional attending a political event. Bill and Walter went next, two elderly veterans presumably there to support a fellow service member's campaign. Peterson waited until last, Ranger on a leash beside him. They had debated extensively how to get the German Shepherd past security. In the end, they had opted for the simplest approach. Peterson wore dark glasses and carried a white-tipped cane, presenting Ranger as a service dog. The irony wasn't lost on Walter. Ranger truly was a service dog, just not in the way security would assume. Walter made it through the metal detector without incident, though his artificial hip earned him a brief pat-down from a polite security officer. He scanned the growing crowd inside the main hall, spotting Sarah near a refreshment table and Tom examining a campaign poster with feigned interest. No sign of Bill yet. The hall was filling rapidly with Harrington supporters, a sea of red, white, and blue campaign merchandise. Large screens displayed Harrington's campaign logo and slogans about service, leadership, integrity, words that made Walter's stomach turn knowing what he now knew. A hand touched his elbow gently. "This way," Bill murmured, guiding Walter toward a position near the left side of the stage. "Peterson's in. He's by the side entrance with Ranger." Security barely glanced at his service dog credentials. They took their positions, maintaining casual separation while staying within visual contact. The crowd continued to grow, the noise level rising with anticipation. Campaign staffers scurried about making last-minute adjustments to the stage, testing microphones, straightening banners. Walter checked his watch, 15 minutes until Harrington was scheduled to speak. His heart was beating too fast, and he took slow, measured breaths to calm himself. The last thing they needed was for him to have another episode now. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Sarah. Media row filling up. Local TV stations present. Good. They needed witnesses, preferably with cameras. The lights dimmed slightly, and upbeat music began playing over the speakers. The crowd's energy shifted, conversations quieting as attention turned toward the stage. A campaign official approached the podium, welcoming attendees and introducing various local dignitaries supporting Harrington's candidacy. Walter scanned the hall again, locating each member of their group. Tom had positioned himself near a cluster of reporters. Sarah stood close to a camera crew from one of the local news stations. Bill had moved to a spot with a clear line to the nearest exit. And Peterson was now visible at the edge of the crowd, Ranger sitting obediently beside him, the dog's ears alert but his demeanor calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, "please welcome your next United States Senator, decorated Marine officer Maxwell Harrington." The crowd erupted in applause as Harrington strode onto the stage, waving confidently. He looked every inch the successful candidate, tailored suit, perfect hair, practiced smile. Behind him followed a small entourage, including his campaign manager, a few staffers, and, Walter's breath caught, Douglas Collins, the property manager who had threatened him. Harrington approached the podium, his smile widening as the applause continued. "Thank you, Arizona," he called out, waiting for the noise to die down. "Thank you for this incredible welcome. It's humbling to see so many patriots gathered here today, united by a vision for a stronger, more secure America." As Harrington launched into his standard stump speech, Walter glanced toward Peterson. The former handler had begun moving slowly through the crowd, angling for a position closer to the stage. Ranger moved beside him, still calm but increasingly alert as they drew nearer to Harrington. Walter's phone vibrated again. Another text from Sarah. "Security watching Peterson, moving to intercept." Walter spotted them immediately, two men in dark suits breaking away from their positions, moving purposefully toward Peterson and Ranger. They must have been briefed, must have been given descriptions. The element of surprise was evaporating. Making a split-second decision, Walter pushed through the crowd toward Peterson, ignoring the irritated murmurs of those he jostled past. He reached Peterson just as the security personnel closed in. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me," one of the guards said firmly, reaching for Peterson's arm. "Is there a problem?" Walter demanded, loud enough to draw attention from nearby attendees. "This man's a veteran, just like me. Just like Harrington claims to be." The security guard hesitated, aware of the optics of roughly handling elderly veterans at a campaign event. That moment of hesitation was all they needed. "Actually," Peterson said clearly, removing his dark glasses, "I served with Lieutenant Harrington in Iraq. My name is Tyler Peterson. I was the handler for this military working dog who was also there the day Sergeant Michael Dawson died." The name caught the attention of several nearby attendees. Harrington had mentioned Michael in his speech the previous day, painting himself as the grieving commander honoring a fallen subordinate. On stage, Harrington continued his speech, unaware of the disturbance brewing at the edge of the crowd. "When I think about my time serving our great nation, I remember the brave men under my command, men like Sergeant Michael Dawson, who gave the ultimate sacrifice." At the sound of Michael's name, Walter felt something snap inside him. Without conscious thought, he pushed past the security guards and moved directly toward the stage, his voice rising above the crowd. "My son didn't die for your career, Harrington," Walter shouted. "Tell them the truth about what happened that day." The crowd fell silent, heads turning toward the disturbance. Harrington paused mid-sentence, squinting into the crowd. Recognition and alarm flashed across his face as he spotted Walter. "That's Michael Dawson's father," someone in the crowd said, the whisper spreading rapidly. Harrington recovered quickly, his political instincts taking over. "Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone, a practiced expression of sympathy replacing his momentary shock. "I understand your pain, sir." "The loss of your son—" "Don't you dare talk about my son," Walter interrupted, continuing to move forward despite the security personnel now converging on his position. "You left him to die. You betrayed your men." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Journalists who had been half listening to yet another campaign speech suddenly focused their attention, cameras swinging toward Walter. "This is difficult for everyone," Harrington said smoothly. "Mr. Dawson is understandably emotional about his loss. Perhaps we could speak privately after—" "No more private conversations," Peterson called out, moving forward with Ranger. "No more cover-ups. This dog was there that day, Harrington. He saw what you did." Harrington's practiced facade slipped for an instant as his eyes locked on Ranger. The German Shepherd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Hackles raised, a low growl building in his throat, body tense with recognition and fear. "Get that dog out of here," Harrington ordered, his voice sharper now. "Security!" The guards moved in quickly, but the crowd had begun to pay attention, phones raised to record the unfolding scene. Sarah had positioned herself near the media section, speaking rapidly to a reporter while pointing toward Walter and Peterson. "That dog is Ranger, a military working dog who served in Iraq," Peterson announced loudly, his voice carrying. "He was with Michael Dawson's unit when they were ambushed, or rather, when they were set up. Look at how he reacts to Harrington." Indeed, Ranger was now fully alert, his growl deepening as he strained against his leash, eyes fixed on Harrington. It was not the behavior of an obedient service dog, but the unmistakable recognition of a threat. Security guards reached Walter first, gripping his arms. "Sir, you need to leave now." Walter didn't resist physically. He didn't need to. The disruption had achieved its purpose. Cameras were rolling, capturing Ranger's reaction to Harrington, recording the accusations being hurled at a Senate candidate by the father of a fallen Marine he'd eulogized just yesterday. "Get them out of here," Harrington ordered, abandoning his sympathetic tone. "This is a private event." As the guards began escorting Walter toward the exit, he locked eyes with Harrington across the distance that separated them. "My son died because of your cowardice," Walter called out, his voice breaking. "You hid while good men bled out. Then you built your career on their sacrifice." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Confusion, discomfort, scattered calls of support for Walter, others of support for Harrington. The carefully orchestrated campaign event had descended into chaos. Peterson was being approached by more security personnel, but before they reached him, he unclipped something from Ranger's collar and tossed it to a nearby reporter, the flash drive containing the preliminary footage. "Evidence of Harrington's actions before the ambush," Peterson called out. "Proof he was meeting with insurgents. Check the dog's reaction. Military working dogs don't lie, even when people do." As Walter was pushed toward the exit, he saw Bill moving to intercept, but Walter shook his head slightly. They had done what they came to do, created a public scene that couldn't be easily dismissed or covered up. The truth was out, captured on dozens of cameras. Outside in the harsh sunlight, Walter found himself suddenly lightheaded, the adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation draining away. His chest tightened uncomfortably, a familiar pressure building behind his breastbone. "Walter!" Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. She had followed him out, evading security in the confusion. "Are you okay? You're pale." Walter tried to respond but found he couldn't catch his breath. The world tilted sideways, the convention center's glass walls blurring in his vision. He was vaguely aware of Sarah calling for help, of being lowered gently to the ground. "Stay with me, Walter," Sarah urged, her face swimming in his narrowing field of vision. "Ambulance is coming. Just hold on." Walter wanted to tell her it was okay, that they had accomplished their mission, that Michael would be proud. But the words wouldn't come. The pressure in his chest had become a crushing vice, squeezing the air from his lungs, the strength from his limbs. Distantly, he heard Peterson's voice, felt Ranger's warm presence suddenly beside him. The German shepherd whined softly, pressing against Walter's side as if trying to lend him strength. "You did good, soldier," Walter whispered to the dog, unsure if the words actually passed his lips or just echoed in his mind. Mission accomplished. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. Walter thought of Michael, of Martha waiting somewhere beyond this life. He had kept his promise, fought for the truth, protected Ranger, exposed Harrington's lies. If this was his last battle, he could face whatever came next with peace. The last thing Walter registered before consciousness slipped away was a cacophony of voices, the wail of approaching sirens, and Ranger's soft muzzle pressed against his hand, loyal to the end, just like his son had been. Tom's voice cut through the fog, urgent and determined. "Don't you dare give up now, Walter. This isn't over. Stay with us." But Walter couldn't respond, couldn't reassure the young lawyer that it was all right. The darkness was warm and welcoming, promising rest after a lifetime of battles. His last coherent thought was simple. Michael would understand. Michael always understood. The world faded to black as Walter Dawson, father of Sergeant Michael Dawson, slipped into unconsciousness on the sun-baked pavement outside the Phoenix Convention Center, the loyal German shepherd who had served alongside his son, maintaining a protective vigil beside him. Inside the convention center, the disruption continued to unfold. News cameras that had been recording Harrington's speech now captured the chaotic aftermath of Walter's accusations. The candidate attempted to regain control, dismissing the interruption as the unfortunate outburst of a grieving father, but the damage was done. Questions were being shouted from the press section. Phones throughout the crowd had recorded Ranger's unmistakable reaction to Harrington. The carefully constructed narrative was unraveling, thread by thread, in front of a live audience. As paramedics worked frantically over Walter's still form, loading him into an ambulance, Peterson stood nearby with Ranger, the German shepherd's eyes fixed on the elderly man who had fought so hard to protect him, to honor the truth. "Hang in there, Walter," Peterson murmured as the ambulance doors closed. "The battle's just beginning." Beeping machines and the antiseptic smell of hospital corridors had become Walter's world. 3 days had passed since his collapse outside the Phoenix Convention Center. 3 days of tests, monitors, and hushed medical consultations just outside his door. The heart attack had been severe, the doctors told Sarah when they thought Walter was sleeping. A widowmaker that would have killed most men his age instantly. Walter had survived, barely, but the damage to his heart was substantial. In his more lucid moments between medication-induced fog and exhaustion, Walter pieced together what had happened after the ambulance doors closed. Sarah rarely left his side, providing updates in her gentle, determined way. The confrontation at the rally had indeed been captured by multiple news outlets. Footage of Ranger's reaction to Harrington had gone viral, particularly after Peterson explained to reporters the significance of a military working dog's behavior. "The internet is calling it the Ranger test," Sarah told him, holding his weathered hand carefully around the IV line. "People are saying if Harrington can't pass the Ranger test, he can't be trusted." Walter had smiled weakly at that. Even in his diminished state, there was satisfaction in knowing the truth was finally emerging. Michael would have appreciated the poetry of it. His father and his unit's military dog exposing the man who had betrayed them all. Harrington had not surrendered easily. Within hours of the disruption, his campaign had issued a statement painting Walter as a mentally unstable, grieving father being manipulated by political opponents. They claimed Ranger had been deliberately agitated before the rally to create a scene. Harrington had even produced veterinary records purporting to show the dog's history of aggression, records Dr. Morris immediately denounced as fabricated. But the momentum had shifted. The flash drive Peterson had tossed to the reporter contained enough preliminary footage to raise serious questions about Harrington's activities before the ambush. Military experts interviewed on news programs confirmed that Ranger's behavior indicated genuine recognition and fear, not staged aggression. Veterans groups across the state issued statements supporting Walter and calling for a formal investigation into Harrington's service record. On the second day, Tom had arrived with news that the Department of Defense had announced a review of the incident that claimed Michael's life. "They're reopening the case, Walter," the young lawyer had said, his exhausted face brightening with vindication. "Too much public pressure to ignore." Now, on the third day, Walter lay propped against pillows watching CNN on the small hospital television. The anchor's voice was measured, but her eyes revealed her engagement with the unfolding story. In a stunning development in the Harrington campaign scandal, two former Marines who served under then-Lieutenant Maxwell Harrington have come forward corroborating claims that Harrington abandoned his men during the ambush that killed 4 Marines, including Sergeant Michael Dawson. These veterans, who asked to remain anonymous, citing fears of retaliation, described Harrington's actions as cowardly and alleged a subsequent cover-up by higher-ranking officers. Walter closed his eyes briefly, a complex wave of emotions washing over him: vindication, grief, a strange sort of peace. Michael's true story was finally being told. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah entered, followed by Peterson, who carried a small duffel bag. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah asked, studying Walter's face with concern. "Like I've been run over by a tank," Walter replied, his voice still weak but carrying a hint of his dry humor. "Where's Ranger?" "Outside with Bill," Peterson explained. "Hospital wouldn't let him in, even with the service dog credentials. Too much publicity now. Everyone recognizes him." Walter nodded, understanding. Ranger had become something of a celebrity in his own right, a symbol of loyalty and truth that resonated far beyond their small circle. "There's something you should know," Peterson continued, setting the duffel bag on the visitor's chair. "Harrington's people are pushing back hard. His campaign manager held a press conference this morning claiming we trained Ranger to react negatively to Harrington's scent. They're trying to discredit the dog now." Walter's face hardened. "Coward till the end." "It's not working," Sarah added quickly. "Public opinion is solidly against Harrington. His polling numbers have collapsed. 3 major donors withdrew their support yesterday." Peterson unzipped the duffel bag, revealing what looked like a tactical vest sized for a dog. "But that's not why we're here. Remember how we talked about Ranger's recording equipment? The vest that went missing after the ambush?" Walter's attention sharpened, his heart rate increasing enough to make one of the monitors beep in warning. "You found it?" "Not exactly," Peterson said, lifting the vest carefully. "This is a different one. After all this publicity, I received an anonymous package yesterday. Inside was this vest, identical to the one Ranger wore in Iraq, and a note." Peterson extracted a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to Walter, who read it with trembling fingers. "I was the supply officer who helped make the original evidence disappear. I've regretted it every day since. This vest is the same model. The memory card is in the inside pocket. It's from the backup system that few people knew existed. I never watched it. Some burdens shouldn't be carried alone. Now it's in the right hands." Walter looked up, barely daring to hope. "Is there really?" Peterson nodded grimly. "A memory card with footage from Ranger's final mission with Michael's unit. I haven't viewed it either. Wanted you to decide what to do with it." The weight of this revelation settled over the hospital room. After years of uncertainty, the truth about Michael's final hours might be contained on a small memory card. Walter stared at the vest, emotions warring within him, the desire to know exactly what happened to his son versus the fear of witnessing his final moments. "Have you told anyone else about this?" Walter asked finally. "Just Tom," Sarah answered. "He's meeting with the DoD investigators this afternoon. He says this could be crucial evidence, but—" She hesitated. "But it's your choice," Peterson finished. "Michael was your son. If you want to view it privately first, or not at all, that's your right." Walter considered this, looking out the window at the slice of blue Arizona sky visible between buildings. What would Michael want? The answer came with surprising clarity. Michael had always valued truth above comfort, justice above ease. "We need to view it," Walter decided. "All of us together. Then we'll decide what to do." Sarah produced a laptop from her bag. "I thought you might say that." As Peterson set up the computer and prepared to insert the memory card, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. The door to Walter's room burst open, revealing Bill's flushed face. "They're trying to take Ranger!" he exclaimed. "Animal Control showed up with police and some court order claiming he's dangerous. They're outside right now!" Peterson was on his feet instantly. "What? That's impossible. The injunction—" "They're saying the injunction is superseded by public safety concerns after the rally incident," Bill explained hurriedly. "I've got him in my truck, but they're looking for him." "Tom's on his way, but—" "This is Harrington," Walter said with sudden certainty. "He knows we have something. He's trying to eliminate the evidence and the witness." The monitor beside Walter's bed beeped more insistently as his heart rate increased. Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. "You need to stay calm," she urged. "We'll handle this." Walter shook his head, already attempting to sit up straighter. "No. We handle it together. Help me up." "Walter, you can't—" Sarah began. "I haven't come this far to back down now," Walter interrupted, his voice finding some of its old strength. "That dog protected my son. Now it's my turn to protect him." Before anyone could argue further, Tom appeared in the doorway, breathless and disheveled. "They've got a seizure order signed by Judge Reynolds, Harrington's golf buddy. It cites Ranger as a dangerous animal based on his behavior at the rally." "Can you fight it?" Peterson demanded. Tom shook his head grimly. "Not immediately. We'd need to go before a different judge, file for an emergency stay. That could take hours, and this order authorizes immediate seizure." Walter's mind raced despite the medications slowing his thoughts. They needed time to view the memory card, time to get the evidence to the proper authorities. "Where's Ranger now?" he asked Bill. "Hidden in my truck in the parking garage, 3rd level, but they're searching the hospital grounds systematically. It's only a matter of time." Walter made a decision. "Peterson, take the memory card and go with Bill. Get Ranger and the evidence somewhere safe. Sarah's cabin would work. Remote, hard to find." "And what about you?" Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. "I'll create a distraction," Walter said simply. "Tom, help me get dressed." Despite protests from everyone in the room, Walter was resolute. With Tom's reluctant assistance, he disconnected the heart monitor, triggering immediate alarms at the nurse's station, and began pulling on the clothes Sarah had brought him days earlier. "Walter, this is madness," Sarah insisted. "You're recovering from a major heart attack." "Which means they can't exactly arrest me for leaving against medical advice," Walter countered, wincing as he pulled on his shirt over the bandages from his catheterization. "I'm still a patient with rights." A nurse appeared in the doorway, alarmed by the disconnected monitors. "Mr. Dawson, what are you doing? You need to get back in bed immediately." "Sorry, ma'am," Walter replied with surprising politeness. "Family emergency. I'm checking myself out." What followed was a carefully orchestrated chaos. While medical staff focused on Walter's attempted departure, calling for doctors, security, and administrators, Peterson slipped out with the memory card and vest. Bill disappeared to secure Ranger and his truck. Tom stayed with Walter, loudly invoking patient rights and demanding AMA against medical advice forms, creating a bureaucratic snarl that drew attention from throughout the floor. Sarah remained torn between worry for Walter and the need to protect Ranger and the evidence. "I should stay with you," she told Walter as a doctor arrived to add his objections. "Go with Peterson," Walter instructed firmly. "Ranger trusts you." "I'll be fine, just creating a paper trail and distraction. Tom will make sure I'm not mistreated." The young lawyer nodded, already on his phone requesting patient advocacy representatives and hospital administration. 20 minutes of bureaucratic wrangling later, Walter sat in a wheelchair near the hospital's main entrance, officially discharged against medical advice after signing numerous forms absolving the hospital of responsibility. Tom stood beside him, briefcase in hand, maintaining the fiction that he was taking Walter home to continue recovery there. Through the glass doors, Walter could see animal control officers and police searching vehicles in the visitor parking lot. The distraction had worked. The employee and service parking areas seemed clear of searchers. "Any word?" Walter asked quietly. Tom checked his phone. "Text from Sarah. They made it out with Ranger, heading to the cabin now." Walter nodded, relief washing over him, followed by a wave of exhaustion. The exertion and stress had taken a toll on his weakened body. "Then it's time for Phase 2. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Getting me back into a hospital bed before I collapse again," Walter admitted, the color draining from his face. "Preferably not this one. Somewhere Harrington's people won't look immediately." Tom understood immediately, already dialing his phone. "My sister's a nurse at Mayo Clinic. Private room, registered under a different name. Give me 10 minutes. As Tom arranged the transfer, Walter gazed out at the bright Arizona afternoon. Somewhere out there, Ranger was safe, carrying with him the truth that had been buried for 15 years. Whatever happened next, Walter had kept his promise to Michael, to Ranger, to himself. His strength was fading, the pain in his chest returning with concerning intensity, but Walter felt a peace he hadn't known since before Michael's death. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed justice was within reach. Hours later, settled in a private room at Mayo Clinic under the name William Davis, Walter received the call he'd been waiting for. Peterson's voice was thick with emotion. "We viewed the footage," he said without preamble. "It's all there, Walter. Everything. Harrington meeting with insurgents before the patrol. Him giving them the patrol route. Him hiding during the ambush while Michael organized the defense. And," Peterson paused, his voice breaking slightly, "Michael's final moments, protecting the wounded even after being hit multiple times." Walter closed his eyes, tears escaping despite his effort to maintain composure. "He died as he lived then." "A hero," Peterson confirmed. "The footage shows it all. We've made copies. Tom has arranged for the DOD investigators to meet us tomorrow morning. This ends Harrington's career, and possibly starts a prison sentence." After the call ended, Walter lay in the dimly lit hospital room, processing everything. The truth about Michael's death had been carried home by a loyal German shepherd who had survived years of abuse to deliver justice. It seemed impossible, yet it had happened. A soft knock at the door roused Walter from his thoughts. To his surprise, Sarah entered with Ranger on a leash beside her. "Before you lecture me on taking risks," she said, noting Walter's startled expression, "this is a certified therapy dog visit, completely legitimate. Mayo has a wonderful program." Walter chuckled weakly. "And the therapy dog just happens to be the most recognized German Shepherd in Arizona right now?" Sarah smiled, leading Ranger to Walter's bedside. "Amazing coincidence, isn't it? The staff thinks he's a different therapy dog. Amazing what a new vest and temporary ID can accomplish." Ranger approached Walter carefully, seeming to sense his fragility. The dog gently rested his head on the edge of the bed, amber eyes fixed on Walter's face with the same intelligence and loyalty that had first drawn them together. Walter placed a trembling hand on Ranger's head. "We did it, boy," he murmured. "Michael would be proud of us both." Sarah sat in the visitor's chair, her expression serious. "Peterson and Tom are meeting with military investigators tomorrow morning. The evidence is overwhelming, but Harrington is already counterattacking, claiming the footage is manipulated, that this is a political hit job." "Let him squirm," Walter said, a steely note entering his weakened voice. "The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard people try to bury it." "There's something else," Sarah added hesitantly. "News vans are camped outside your house. Reporters are calling the shelter nonstop trying to reach me. This story has gone national." Walter nodded slowly. "Michael's story deserves to be heard, not just what happened to him, but who he was, what he stood for." "And Ranger's story, too," Sarah said softly, watching the German Shepherd who maintained his gentle contact with Walter. "From war hero to abuse survivor to truth bringer. People are already calling for him to receive some kind of recognition." A small smile touched Walter's lips. "He'd probably prefer a good bone and a quiet place to sleep." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the quiet beeping of monitors and Ranger's occasional contented sigh. Walter felt the weight of the past 15 years beginning to lift. Michael's true heroism would be recognized. Harrington would face consequences for his betrayal. Ranger would be safe. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could bring Michael back. But it was more than Walter had dared hope for just weeks ago. "What happens next?" Sarah asked eventually. "After the investigation? After the evidence is public?" Walter looked down at Ranger, then back at Sarah, the young woman who had brought this loyal dog into his life and stood by them both through everything that followed. "I think," Walter said slowly, "it's time to start living again instead of just surviving. Michael would want that. For all of us." As if understanding, Ranger lifted his head and licked Walter's hand once, a gesture of agreement and connection that required no translation. Outside the hospital window, the Arizona sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, a fitting backdrop to the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Whatever challenges tomorrow would bring, they would face them together, an unlikely family forged in loss, united by loyalty and now, finally, healed by truth. 6 months later, Walter sat on his front porch, the warm spring sunshine easing the perpetual ache in his joints. Ranger lay at his feet, gray now showing around his muzzle, but his amber eyes still alert as he surveyed their shared domain. The old German Shepherd had adapted to retirement with the same stoic dignity he'd shown throughout his difficult life, content now with simple pleasures. A comfortable bed, regular meals, and the freedom to patrol the boundaries of Walter's property each morning. The property itself had undergone a transformation. Where once there had been only Walter's neglected garden, there now stretched neat rows of vegetables, a small flower garden, and even a few fruit trees, Sarah's additions to what she called their healing project. The old house had received a fresh coat of paint, its weathered boards renewed in a warm blue-gray that Martha would have approved of. Walter sipped his coffee, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past half-year. After the memory card footage had been turned over to military investigators, events had moved with surprising speed. The Department of Defense had opened a formal inquiry into the ambush that killed Michael and 3 other Marines. Maxwell Harrington's political career had imploded virtually overnight, his campaign suspended indefinitely as he faced both military and civilian investigations. The media frenzy had been intense. Reporters camping outside Walter's home, national news programs running special segments on the hero, the traitor, and the dog. Walter had initially refused all interviews, his health still fragile, but eventually agreed to one carefully controlled conversation with a respected veteran journalist. He had spoken not of Harrington's betrayal, but of Michael's courage, not of his own vindication, but of the loyalty of a military working dog who had carried the truth home. That interview had touched something in the national consciousness. Veterans groups had rallied around Walter and Ranger, offering support, legal assistance, and protection from harassment. When Walter was finally released from Mayo Clinic, he had returned home to find his house guarded by a rotating volunteer force of former service members, his kitchen stocked with home-cooked meals, and his yard maintained by people he'd never met but who understood the meaning of brotherhood. The legal proceedings against Harrington were still ongoing. Military justice moved with deliberate slowness, but the outcome seemed increasingly certain. 3 more members of Michael's unit had come forward with testimony supporting the evidence from Ranger's recording. Harrington's carefully constructed image had crumbled, revealing a man who had built a career on fabricated heroism while betraying the very principles he claimed to uphold. Walter's reflections were interrupted by the sound of Sarah's car coming up the driveway. Ranger's ears perked up, his tail thumping against the porch boards in recognition. The German Shepherd might be devoted to Walter, but he had developed a special bond with Sarah, who had saved him from euthanasia and fought alongside them both when it mattered most. "Good news," Sarah called as she climbed out of her car, waving what looked like an official letter. At 34, she radiated an energy that Walter found both exhausting and invigorating. She took the porch steps 2 at a time, dropping into the chair beside him and scratching Ranger's ears in greeting. "The adoption is final," she announced, handing Walter the letter. "Ranger is officially, legally yours. No one can ever take him away again." Walter examined the document, official seals and signatures confirming what his heart had known for months. Ranger belonged with him, 2 old soldiers supporting each other in their final years. "Never doubted it," Walter said gruffly, though the relief in his eyes betrayed his casual tone. The legal process had been complicated by Harrington's earlier claims of ownership, requiring special intervention and a judge's ruling that took into account Ranger's military service and the documented abuse he had suffered. "There's more," Sarah continued, her expression brightening further. "The Veteran Service Dog program called. They want Ranger to be their honorary mascot. Just appearances at a few events, nothing strenuous. They're launching a new initiative to pair retired military dogs with veterans." Walter nodded approval. He'd be good at that. Always did have a way of knowing who needed him most. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked between man and dog. "You both do." The comfortable silence that followed was one of many they had shared in recent months. After Walter's second hospitalization, Sarah had temporarily moved into his spare room to help with his recovery. A temporary had somehow become indefinite, her presence filling the old house with a warmth it had lacked since Martha's passing. She maintained her own apartment in town, but spent most nights at Walter's, their arrangement unquestioned by either of them. "Tom called," Sarah said eventually. "The Military Review Board has reached a preliminary decision. They're recommending Michael's Silver Star be upgraded to a Navy Cross based on the new evidence of his actions during the ambush." Walter's throat tightened, his eyes suddenly burning. The Silver Star, awarded posthumously to Michael, had recognized his valor, but the Navy Cross would acknowledge what the memory card had revealed. Extraordinary heroism in the face of certain death, saving multiple lives at the cost of his own. "He never cared much for medals," Walter said when he could trust his voice again. "Always said he was just doing his job." "That's what heroes always say," Sarah replied gently. "Doesn't make it any less deserving of recognition." Walter couldn't argue with that. His gaze drifted to the end of the driveway where a simple flagpole now stood, another addition since his return home. The American flag that had draped Michael's coffin flew there now, a daily reminder of sacrifice and service. "The ceremony's next month," Sarah continued, "at Quantico. They want you to receive the medal on Michael's behalf. Peterson will be there too. They're acknowledging his efforts to bring the truth to light." Walter nodded slowly. The thought of traveling across the country, of standing before military officials and cameras, was daunting. But for Michael, he would do it. One final duty as a father. "And Ranger?" he asked. "They allowing him to attend?" Sarah smiled. "Special permission granted. They recognize his role in all this. In fact," she hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed, "they're presenting him with something too—" "A commemorative medal for military working dogs, first of its kind." Walter looked down at Ranger, who had settled with his chin on Walter's foot, ever the protective guardian. "Hear that, boy? You're getting a medal. Probably chew on it, knowing you." Ranger's tail thumped once against the porch, his eyes closing contentedly in the warm sunshine. He had never needed recognition. His loyalty was its own reward. But Walter appreciated the gesture nonetheless. The world was finally acknowledging what he had known from the beginning. Ranger was a hero in his own right. The afternoon passed peacefully, Walter and Sarah discussing the upcoming ceremony, making plans for the journey to Virginia. Walter's health had improved steadily over the months, though his doctors had made it clear that his heart would never fully recover. Each day was a gift now, to be valued rather than merely endured. As twilight approached, Bill's truck rumbled up the driveway for their standing Thursday dinner, another post-hospital tradition that had somehow become permanent. The old veteran emerged carrying a covered dish, his face creased in a smile beneath his Vietnam veteran's cap. "Hope everyone likes lasagna," he called. "Mary's recipe, best in the county." Inside, the kitchen came alive with the comfortable rituals of shared meals, plates being set, drinks poured, Ranger taking his accustomed place near Walter's chair. Peterson arrived shortly after, bringing a bottle of wine and news from his new job training service dogs for veterans with PTSD. This, too, had become part of Walter's new life, his home filled with voices and laughter, no longer a shrine to loss, but a place of connection. Tom joined them when his schedule allowed, the young lawyer now handling several high-profile veterans' rights cases inspired by Walter and Ranger's story. After dinner, as coffee was served and Bill launched into one of his improbable Vietnam stories, Walter found himself observing the scene with a sense of wonder. These people, this unlikely family assembled through circumstance and choice, had brought him back from the brink. Not just physically after his heart attack, but spiritually from the years of isolated grief. "Penny for your thoughts?" Sarah asked softly, noticing his contemplative expression. Walter smiled slightly. "Just thinking Martha would approve. She always said a home needs voices in it." Sarah's hand covered his briefly, a gesture of understanding that required no response. She had heard many stories about Martha over the months, just as Walter had learned about Sarah's own past. Her childhood in foster care, her determination to help animals others had given up on, her gradual building of a life defined by compassion rather than circumstance. Later, after Bill and Peterson had departed and Sarah was washing dishes despite Walter's protest that he could manage, Walter sat in his recliner with Ranger at his feet. On the side table beside him stood a framed photograph, Walter, Martha, and Michael, on their last fishing trip together before Michael's enlistment. Beside it now stood a newer photo taken at Christmas. Walter in his recliner, Sarah perched on the arm, Ranger between them, Bill and Peterson flanking them, Tom kneeling in front. Different faces, different generation, same sense of belonging. "You would have liked them, Mikey," Walter murmured to the older photo. "Especially Sarah. She's got your mother's spirit." From the kitchen came the homey sounds of running water and clinking dishes, Sarah humming tunelessly to herself. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound, but he remained at Walter's side, loyal guardian and companion. The Navy Cross ceremony was still weeks away, a public acknowledgment of Michael's heroism and Harrington's betrayal. Walter both dreaded and anticipated it. There would be cameras, questions, the weight of official recognition, but beyond that ceremony lay something Walter had not expected to find again, a future worth living for. His health would always be fragile now, his time limited, but the days no longer stretched before him as an empty obligation to be endured. There were Sarah's gardens to tend, Ranger's evening walks to enjoy, Bill's outrageous stories to dispute, young veterans at the VA hospital who needed someone who understood their silence. There was a life to be lived, however long or short it might be. As if sensing his thoughts, Ranger raised his head and placed it on Walter's knee, amber eyes meeting blue in a moment of perfect understanding. They had both survived war, loss, and betrayal. They had both carried wounds, visible and invisible. And somehow, against all odds, they had both found their way home. "We did good, didn't we, boy?" Walter asked softly, his weathered hand stroking the German shepherd's graying muzzle. Ranger's gentle whuff of agreement needed no translation. From the kitchen doorway, Sarah watched them silently, her heart full. The journey that had begun with a reluctant foster arrangement for an abandoned military dog had transformed all their lives in ways none could have imagined. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Walter's health, the public scrutiny of the upcoming ceremony, the ongoing legal proceedings against Harrington, they would face them together. Outside, stars emerged in the clear Arizona sky, the same stars that had shone over battlefields where brave men and loyal dogs had served together. The same stars that watched over them now, in peace rather than war, in healing rather than harm. Walter Dawson, who had once believed he had nothing left to live for, now understood what Michael had perhaps known all along, that loyalty, truth, and love were worth fighting for, worth living for, no matter the cost. As Sarah rejoined them in the living room, settling on the couch with a book, Ranger moved to lie between them, a bridge connecting past and present, loss and renewal. Walter felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. This was not the life he had planned, not the future he had envisioned when he first agreed to foster an unwanted German shepherd with a mysterious past. It was, perhaps, something better. A life built not despite tragedy but through it, a family forged in the crucible of shared purpose. Michael would understand. Michael would approve. In the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the family he had found in the winter of his life, Walter finally made peace with the past. The German shepherd he had planned to return had led him not just to justice for his son, but to a reason to keep living. Some might call it chance, coincidence, or luck. Walter Dawson called it coming home. Dear friends, Walter Dawson's journey with Ranger reminds us that it's never too late for a new chapter, even after profound loss. Many of us understand the emptiness after losing a spouse or watching children move away. That feeling that our most meaningful days are behind us. Walter thought he was merely existing until a German shepherd with a mysterious past entered his life, giving him purpose when he needed it most. Their story shows us that loyalty and connection can find us in unexpected ways, often when we've stopped looking. The family Walter built in his later years, Sarah, Bill, Tom, and Peterson, wasn't the one he planned, but became the one he needed. Like Walter, we all deserve second chances at joy, at purpose, at family, whatever form that takes. His story reminds us that our capacity to care, to fight for what's right, and to love deeply doesn't diminish with age. What unexpected relationship has brought new meaning to your life after 50? Or what cause might give you the sense of purpose Walter found in seeking justice for his son? Please share your stories in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what another person needs to hear today.